This is Ngozi Fulani. She's the founder of the charity Sister Space, which provides support for African and Caribbean heritage women affected by abuse. And at a recent event at Buckingham Palace, she was subject to racial abuse. After the event, and from the Sister Space Twitter account, Fulani said this: "Mixed feelings about yesterday's visit to Buckingham Palace. 10 minutes after arriving, a member of staff, Lady SH, approached me, moved my hair to see my name badge. The conversation below took place. The rest of the event is a blur." And then she says, "Thanks to Mandu Reid and Suzanne Jacobs for support." Now, this is the text of the conversation, so shared by Fulani in that tweet. The aide says, "Where are you from?" And Fulani says, "Sister Space." The aide says, "No, where do you come from?" She says, "We're based in Hackney." "No, what part of Africa are you from?" And then she says, "I don't know. They didn't leave any records." Then the aide says, "Well, you must know where you're from. I spent time in France. Where are you from?" And then she said, "Here, UK." "No, but what nationality are you?" "I am born here and am British." Then the aide says, "No, but where do you really come from? Where do your people come from?" And she says, "My people? Lady, what is this?" And she said, "Oh, I can see I am going to have a challenge getting you to say where you're from. When did you first come here?" She says, "Lady, I am a British national. My parents came here in the 50s when..." She says, "Oh, I knew we'd get there in the end. You're Caribbean." And Fulani says, "No, lady, I am of African heritage, Caribbean descent, and British nationality." And then the royal household lady says, "Oh, so you're from..." The exchange was witnessed by two other women, and one of them was Mandu Reid, leader of the Women's Equality Party. She spoke to Sky News about the incident.
We arrived at the reception and were ushered into the main room where the reception was taking place. Myself, Ngozi, and another campaigner were standing together, three of us, black women. We were approached by a member of the royal household who came over, began the usual small talk. Very quickly, she zoomed in on Ngozi and asked her where she was from. Ngozi said she was from Sister Space, which is the organization she leads. But what followed was almost an interrogation. There was question after question about where she was really from, where her people came from, what her nationality was. And Ngozi said, "I'm British. I was born in the UK," but that wasn't enough for this person. This person really wanted to extract some other information about her heritage, her African heritage. And it was really uncomfortable. In the end, it was a prolonged encounter over several minutes. And in the end, it left, all of us feeling like perhaps we didn't belong at the event. Perhaps we weren't truly welcome.
The woman who made those comments to Ngozi Fulani is understood to be Lady Susan Hussey. She was a close friend of the late Queen and is godmother to Prince William. She's also 83. Now, this is the response from Buckingham Palace. So they have said, "We take this incident extremely seriously and have investigated immediately to establish the full facts. In this instance, unacceptable and deeply regrettable comments have been made. We have reached out to Ngozi Fulani on this matter, and we are inviting her to discuss all elements of her experience in person if she wishes. In the meantime, the individual concerned would like to express her profound apologies for the hurt caused and has stepped aside from her honorary role with immediate effect. All members of the household are being reminded of the diversity and inclusivity policies which they are required to uphold at all times." I don't know what's it going to like rule 5 of the handout. Don't aggressively ask people where they're from if they're not white. I can't see what else they're going to be reminded of. Don't be like a racist asshole. Anyway, not everyone thinks there's something to apologize for. Petronella Wyatt is a former deputy editor at The Spectator. She tweeted this today: "I've known Lady Susan Hussey since I was 18. She's a decent woman and certainly not a racist. She often asked my mother where she was from because she had a Central European accent. I am sometimes mistaken for non-British because of my colouring. I'm never offended." This was the follow-up. "Poor Susan Hussey is 83, and this must be the first time she has ever offended anyone. She is very kind and considerate, and I feel sorry for her. Her main sin appears to be friendly curiosity. I have often asked people where their families have originally come from."
I'm just so glad that Petronella is on the case, because without her, how would I know if something racist has happened in Buckingham Palace or not? Hers is the verdict that we were all waiting for. I just love the idea of like, this woman has been very publicly criticized for saying something racist, and this woman, Petronella, is like, "I say that all the time." And Like, it's fine. And it's like, okay, if I were you, I'd just keep quiet. You're not helping yourself. There's an irony here, actually, that hasn't been talked about very much, which is that all the things that we're told that the royal family does for society, it provides cohesion, it has a sense of duty, stability, and that's why, it's fine that they're the world's biggest landowner. It's fine that they're given £100 million a year from the government whilst people can't afford to heat their homes. Yet I can't think of many organizations that actually embody those principles of, service to your community, of providing stability, than Sister Space. Like, that's one of the things that's being lost here, which is Sister Space. This is one of the very few organizations in this country that provides specific domestic abuse support for Black women. It supports Black survivors of domestic violence in a way that is actually meaningfully accessible to them, because it is aware of the specific needs that that community has, the specific ways in which they can have safety and healing in a very vulnerable moment. It's also an organization that has, by the skin of its teeth, survived essentially an all-out assault on these kinds of services. When we look at the impact of austerity on domestic violence services across the sector, it's been devastating, but it's been particularly devastating on organizations that are set up in order to specifically cater to the needs of Black and minority ethnic women. And so, in the middle of that kind of onslaught by austerity, Sister Space has held on by the skin of their teeth, despite the fact that demands for their services have increased by 500% in recent years, according to their figures. They have managed to keep going, especially under lockdown when demand was very high. They've also survived multiple eviction attempts. Basically, this is an organization that has done all of these things that we're told the royal family is there to do. They've actually done it in their community in incredibly hostile conditions. And that austerity, that kind of attack on those kind of services, this is an example of kind of interpersonal racism and racial abuse. That is an example of systemic racial violence that has impacted and threatened the lives and livelihoods of thousands of women of color in this country, particularly in London, where Sister Space operates. And so when it comes to this ignorant comment, this is something that people of color hear all the time, despite the fact that it has been explained over and over again in almost any forum I can think of, why this is an inappropriate and alienating thing to ask someone. I'm not especially surprised that the memo hasn't reached this 80-year-old woman who has spent her life working in an institution that, more than almost anything else, represents colonial plunder. Buckingham Palace explicitly banned the employment of, to use their terms, coloureds and foreign immigrants to clerical roles until at least the late 1960s. So it doesn't surprise me that the memo hasn't reached her. This is ultimately the kind of attitude that this institution represents. And I think we should ask ourselves why we give that institution so much financial and symbolic and cultural power. What does that say about us? But for me, what also really communicates disrespect in a way that you really don't need to have anti-racism training or to be an expert in critical race theory or even to have your finger on the pulse to realize is disrespectful, is the fact that this woman felt entitled to essentially harangue Ngozi for an answer that she clearly didn't feel comfortable giving, or she clearly wasn't prepared to give. From the outline of the interaction that we've heard from Mandu and Ngozi, it's very clear that Ngozi in the moment expressed in basic words, the questions you're asking me makes me feel like you don't think I'm British. The question, I don't want to divulge this information to you. This line of questioning, I find it uncomfortable and disrespectful. And yet she had this entitlement to be able to just keep going and keep haranguing her until she got the answer that she wanted. And that, to me, take away all of the kind of knowledge about how, why that question is inappropriate and whatever. You can't explain that away with age and things like that. the fact that she felt this woman is here to basically do as I tell her, to give me whatever answers I want from her, and that I have the ability to speak to her in that way. I don't think she speaks to, privately educated white men in that way. She doesn't speak to them in that kind of, really like demeaning and interrogatory way. That demonstrates that she doesn't see her as a full person who is worthy of like respect and dignity and boundaries. That doesn't take an expert in racial politics to understand.